Hello fellow photographers. Today we're going to be talking about depth of field. Okay, what is depth of field? Depth of field is the distance between the closest and the furthest object in your photo that appears acceptably sharp. Your camera can only focus at one point at a time. But the transition from sharp to unsharp in your image is gradual, so I would say for a photo to be acceptably sharp, it's going to be left up to the photographer. As long as what you're focusing on in your image appears sharp, then I would say your photo is acceptably sharp. So when I said your camera can only focus on one point at a time, I've got a ruler here. We're going to do a test here in a minute. That way you can kind of see what I'm talking about. But based on from where your camera is to where the subject is, to where the furthest subject is, to where the closest subject is, that is your different plane of what the camera can focus on. Now, if you've set up your camera here like this, and you're trying to take a picture of this ruler, and you're trying to get these two spots in focus, but your depth of field is only allowing you to get half of this spot in focus, then you can either compensate by changing your zoom if you have a zoom lens. This one is not, so obviously we can't do that. You can move further away from your image, or you can change your f-stop. If you have a wide aperture, you can make a smaller aperture by changing your f-stop from something like 3.5 to 5.6 to 8 to 11, so on and so forth. Now, if you want to stay close to your subject and you want to keep that aperture you have at 3.5, but you're only getting half of what you want acceptably sharp, that's when you can do something like focus stacking. Now, I'm not going to get into focus stacking today, but I do have a video that I've already posted that will tell you how to focus stack and what focus stacking is. So, back to depth of field. What controls it? Well, I just mentioned changing your aperture, changing your focal length, or moving your camera closer or further away from it. So those are the three things that are going to control your depth of field. So your distance from your camera to your subject, your focal length, and your f-stop. So a picture shot at 300 millimeters at f3.5, taken from only 5 inches away from a subject, will result in a very shallow depth of field. Now, you can calculate how many inches of depth of field will be visible in your image, but honestly, that's something that you will probably never do. I know I never have, and I've never needed to know that number. What is more important to know is when you need a small depth of field and how to create it. And the same is true when you need a large depth of field. The great thing about digital is that you can take a shot and then review it on the LCD and quickly know what is acceptable for your photograph from an artistic point of view and not a mathematical one. So, just to go over it one more time, to achieve a shallower depth of field, you can either move closer to your subject or open up your aperture. For a greater depth of field, move further away from your subject or stop down your aperture, and you can also use a shorter focal length to achieve more depth of field or more zoomed in to achieve less depth of field. Understanding what factors control depth of field in a photograph will give you the artistic freedom to make the images you want to create. You will learn the most from practicing. Take some time to experiment with your camera. Get to know it a little better. Try different focal lengths, change apertures. Most importantly, move your feet to change your perspective. Walk further away from your subject or walk closer to it. Analyze your photograph so that you know how your gear performs. Then when it comes time to take pictures that really count, you will be ready. So, real quickly, I said we're going to take a couple pictures, just kind of show you depth of field. So I'm going to set this up real quick. Okay, so now we're going to take some pictures of this ruler here. That way you can see how the f-stop is going to affect your depth of field. So we're going to start this at f3, and we're going to set our shutter speed accordingly. Take a picture. And we're going to change our f-stop here now to 5.6. Adjust the shutter speed. We're going to move up to f8. And we're going to move up to f11. Now we're going to move up to f16. f22. And then finally f36. So hopefully those images that I had up there can kind of show you a little bit about how your depth of field is going to change based on your aperture settings. I hope this was informative to you, so until next week, I hope you have fun shooting.